Welcome to the G5 Hive and our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the teams the best. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, please leave a rate and review. Today, we will be taking a look at the Navy Midshipmen, who are coming off a 5-7 season, and they just wrapped up their 2024 spring practice with their spring game on April 12th. Please welcome to the show Bill Wagner, sports writer covering Navy athletics for the Capital Gazette. Bill can be found on X at @BWagner_CapGaz. Welcome to the show, Bill.
How you guys doing? Glad to be with you.
Glad to have you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you into covering Navy athletics?
Yeah, I grew up in Annapolis, so I'm an Annapolis native. Obviously, grew up reading the paper that I write for. In fact, both of them, the Baltimore Sun and the Capital newspaper. The local paper is the Capital. That serves our entire county and the city of Annapolis. And so I was always very interested in journalism, and particularly sports journalism. And as I went to a high school right in the heart of Annapolis called St. Mary's, private Catholic school. And as luck would have it, I played sports there and got to know the Capital sports editor. And my senior year, he offered me an opportunity to work as what they call in the newspaper business a stringer, taking high school sports off the phone and inputting them into the system. And that's kind of how I got connected to the Capital. And then I went to Towson University, where I got a mass communications degree specific with journalism. And I was hired directly by the Capital newspaper chain, not immediately at the Capital and not immediately covering sports. I initially covered news for one of their weeklies called the Maryland Gazette. But lo and behold, I made it to the Capital. I spent the first 7-8 years as the high school sports editor. Then when Joe Gross, who was the longtime Navy beat writer, decided he no longer wanted to be on the road constantly covering games, he'd been doing it for something like 30 years. He handed it off to me, and I have now been doing it 30 years.
30 years. Wow.
That's awesome. For those of us that are college football fans, particularly G5 fans, we're pretty familiar with the Navy offense, but some folks that maybe, are more peripheral fans might not be as familiar. How would you describe the Navy offense to those type of people?
Well, first and foremost, we have a major change with the Navy offense effective this spring. They are no longer running strictly the triple option. They have a new offensive coordinator named Drew Cronick, and Drew is a practitioner of wing T offense. However, his wing T is nothing like you would probably think of from high school level. He has a very evolved wing T offense. He calls it the millennial version of wing T offense. And but it is based in the fundamentals of wing T offense. And he is going to incorporate triple option elements. He's going to incorporate run pass option elements, but it is the wing T, and it is different. And having been out at Navy football practice, quite often during the spring, it's going to be quite a change for fans to see. It is not the exact same setup, although they will on occasion get into the traditional triple option alignment, which is the two wings. They don't call them slot backs anymore, by the way. They're now calling them snipes because they do different things. But occasionally you'll see the traditional triple option alignment, but more often than not, you're going to see a lot of different things. A typical wing T is a fullback, two wing backs, one wide receiver, and a tight end. And Cronick does get into that quite a bit, that personnel grouping. And tight ends will become an important position in his offense. And right now, they don't really have a lot of true tight ends that were recruited as tight ends. They have guys who've been converted to tight ends. So that's going to be important positional development moving forward. But to make a long story short, they're not running the triple option the way that you all are accustomed to seeing. They have a new offense. And to be honest, I don't think any of us are going to know exactly what it is until we see it unveiled on the field during the 2024 season.
Well, that's an interesting tidbit going into the 2024 season, but it sounds like they're still going to do a little bit of running here. So Navy's always had a strong running game, and 2023 was no different. They ranked 18th in rushing offense with 195 yards per game. But let's start by looking at the position that kept that rushing offense humming, and that's the quarterback. They lose Ty Lavatai to and Xavier Arline from last year's team, but they do return Braxton Woodson and Blake Horvath, amongst others. How did that quarterback room look in the spring?
Well, Blake Horvath emerged from spring camp as the clear-cut starter. He performed better than Braxton Woodson. Blake will be a junior in 2024. Woodson will be a sophomore. Both received significant playing time last season, largely due to injuries to Lavatai and Arline wasn't even in the mix till the end, to be honest. Largely due to injuries. First, Lavatai got hurt. That gave Horvath an opportunity. Then Horvath got injured, and that gave Woodson an opportunity. So they got playing time. They got valuable experience. Woodson actually threw a beautiful touchdown pass in the UNC Charlotte game, which was a very low-scoring game, and that proved to kind of be the decisive tally. So these guys, they're young, but they have experience. But coming out of spring camp, Blake Horvath is the starter. He executed the offense better. I think he's a better runner than Woodson at this point in his career, and I think that's very important because in Drew Cronick's system, they get the quarterback on the move. They want to roll him out, and they want to move the pocket and do some things. That's important to his offense, and Horvath has shown a better ability to do that.
Moving over to the running back room, they returned just about everyone from a year ago, including Alex Texa, Dave Fofana, Eli Heidenreich, Brandon Chapman, Anton Hall Jr., and others. How did the running backs look in the spring?
Well, first and foremost, it's going to be interesting to see, again, the Navy's traditionally had slot backs and a fullback. And I think with the new offense that it's not going to be as quite a distinct difference in body type and, running ability and just the entire makeup. If you have watched Navy over the years, the slot backs are tiny. They're 5'6", 5'7", 5'8", 165, 170 pounds. They're tiny guys. I don't know that is going to work moving forward just because of the way they use what they're now calling the snipe position. And I don't know that they need a bruiser at fullback because they're not as often in the triple option set where the fullback is so close to the line of scrimmage. That's why you always wanted a big guy, because he's hitting the line very quickly, and sometimes he has to make a hole himself. So I think they're going to start change their recruiting profile in that regard and make a more versatile running back, as you just described, where they're all similar and can all be used in different ways, and they're all versatile. But for now, Alex Texa and Daba Fofana were fullbacks in the previous system, so they will most often line up behind the quarterback in that fullback type mode. And Alex Texa was outstanding last year. He has excellent speed. He is a guy that can do a lot more things than a traditional Navy fullback. He can catch the ball out of the backfield, which is another thing I think you're going to see more often. Screen passes and flares and things using backs out of the backfield to catch the ball. But Texa is a very dynamic player, and he'll probably be the lead for now. Let's just call it fullback. And Daba Fofana, who was named team captain recently, offensive team captain, he had a huge year 2 years ago as the fullback in Navy's triple option, but he kind of dropped off last year, largely because Texa got more of the playing time and the carries. So those are the two primary guys as what I'll call out of the backfield behind the quarterback. And then Eli Heidenreich is a guy to keep an eye on. He is a tremendous talent, very versatile. He was a wide receiver in high school, so he's very, very comfortable lining up in a receiver mode, and they're going to do that quite often with him. I think you're going to see him in more of a traditional slot receiver alignment more often this season. But he also can run the ball, and I think they like to do jet sweeps and other type things, and I think you would see Eli Heidenreich doing that. But he is, from what I saw in the spring, Eli Heidenreich is the most dangerous weapon Navy has right now. He's fast, he's quick, he's can break tackles. He's got the power to break some tackles. He is just a very dynamic performer. Numerous times during spring camp, Eli Heidenreich, either on a reception or a run, breaking away for touchdowns. So I think he is a big offensive weapon to keep an eye on going into this season.
Nice. The offensive line loses Joshua Pena and Sam Glover, who started many games for the Midshipmen in 2023, but they do return Connor McMahon, Brent Self, Ben Purvis, Javon Booten, Trey Cummings, and others. How did that group look in the spring, and are they ready to continue? Open up holes for that running game?
I think they look better than expected. Drew Cronick had said that the most difficult position in terms of learning his offense was the offensive line, because they're doing different things. So they're no longer in the mauler type mode where they're hand in the dirt and they're going forward at all times. That's what was your triple option mode for an offensive line, is a very come off the ball hard, really get into the guy across from you as fast as possible. Now that Navy's going to be throwing the ball more often, they've had to have a more balanced stance because they're going to be in pass protection mode more often. So that's a big change for the offensive linemen, but they seem to do pretty well. And again, based off how the offense performed, I would say the line came together pretty well. And I think you named the starting lineup. It's going to be Connor McMahon at left tackle, Ben Purvis at left guard, Brent Self, who's a returning starter at center, Javon Boughton at right guard that he replaces Pena, and Trey Cummings at right tackle. So those are the guys that shined, and what they're going to have to do here, especially during August training camp, is develop more depth, because behind them a lot of young guys that aren't experienced. So they're going to have to get depth, because you're going to lose linemen, have them go down over the course of a season. But I from my take in brand new offense, the line looked pretty good to me during the spring.
You may have already answered this question, but if you had to pick an offensive breakout player for 2024, who would that be?
That is a very good question. One of the things we're trying to figure out is wide receiver. During spring camp, Navy had 5-6 wide receivers unavailable, either because they'd undergone off-season surgery, or, and here's the guy I'm going to mention, in the case of Nathan Kent, he is a member of the track and field program. So he did indoor track and field, and he does outdoor track and field. He's currently in season. He missed spring camp because of his commitment to the track and field program, but Nathan Kent is a sprinter. He is the Patriot League champion in both the 200 and the 400-meter dash. He is a speedster. Navy fans will remember 2 years ago when he was a freshman, he took a reverse and would look like he was shot out of a cannon and running 60-some yards for a touchdown. So he is a guy that has tremendous game-breaking ability. Now, last season, he was barely used. They barely targeted him. So Nathan Kent was like a lost or missing in action, if you will, last season. So they need a receiver. They lost Jaden Umbarger, who was their primary target a year ago, and they have got to develop a go-to wide receiver. And the obvious guy is Nathan Kent. He's 6'4", long leg, long strider, speedy, as you mentioned. Guy's a conference champion sprinter. So you got, if utilized correctly, Nathan Kent's your breakout performer.
Awesome. Navy returns a fair amount of production on the defensive side of the ball, but they do lose second leading tackler Will Harbor to graduation, and they return Colin Ramos and Luke Paris, among others. How did that linebacking group look in the spring?
Well, Harbor, obviously, the way that Navy's defense is set up, and it's been this way for many years, the inside linebackers are going to make the bulk of tackles. That's just the way it's designed. Ramos actually had a better year than Harbor. Ramos was Navy's most valuable player as selected by the team, the coaches. He also won the Silver Helmet Award, which is presented by the Touchdown Club of Annapolis, a local organization, to Navy's most outstanding player. So Ramos, he was first team All-American Athletic Conference. So Ramos had the best season of any player on the entire team, much less defender. And so obviously having Ramos come back is huge. They have to replace Will Harbor. There was a player that emerged during the spring, which he had not played at all last season, and his name is Job Grant. And it looks as though he and Kyle Jacob he was not available during spring camp because of off-season surgery. Those two will go into August training camp battling for Harbor's job. And then the bigger is Navy lost both. It's outside linebacker. So Navy has two outside linebackers. One they call the striker, the other they call the raider. The striker is like a glorified safety, and that's exactly the type of player they want there. Almost every player at the position was recruited as a safety, and that player has to, is either in pass coverage or is rushing the quarterback in blitz situations. So you want a more athletic, more versatile guy there. And then the raider position is like a defensive end. So Navy's got a 3-4 alignment. And if you want to put another guy and turn it into a 4-man front, the raider is that guy. So he's got to be a little bit bigger, bulkier, able to stand up to and provide run support defense. Now they had two guys last year. Jordan Sanders was a starter at the beginning of the year and was performing well, but he got injured. And this guy, Luke Pierce, who came out of nowhere and had, again, a guy that had not played as a plebe. He'd been on junior varsity, so no one had ever seen him. Well, he replaced Sanders and was phenomenal. He became a real playmaker. He was probably one of the most surprising performers of last season. So they've got two really solid players, in my opinion, at the Raider linebacker spot. But at the striker position, this guy, Jackson Campbell, needs to step up. Going into last season, I think they thought Campbell would be a guy that would be an impact player, and he just was not ready. He did not make the adjustment from safety to outside linebacker and did not wind up playing very much on the defensive side of the ball. He strictly played special teams. Well, now they graduated two guys. Their top two strikers, Xavier McDonald and Avon Gibbons, graduated. So Campbell's got to step up. To me, that's a major question mark position for the Navy defense.
Speaking of Xavier McDonald, he was one of the leaders on that team, but they do return some others in the defensive backfield. Raywan Lane III, Andrew Duhart, Deshaun Peel, and others. How did the defensive backs look in the spring?
Well, Ray Lane's the leader back there. He's a playmaker. He's a ball hawk. He's the type of guy that just seems to find the ball. A lot of pass breakups, interceptions. He was outstanding last year, played at an all-conference level, and he'll just be better as a senior. So you got a real player in Ray Lane, and he's kind of what you would call the free safety. They move him around. I think this year you may see them move him up into more of a close to the line of scrimmage so that he can blitz the quarterback because he's such a playmaker. He's a guy that can make plays. But the guy that Deshaun Peel was probably the most solid cornerback last year. I wouldn't say the cornerbacks were great last season, but of the cornerbacks, he was the most solid and consistent. So he's a real leader. Duhart was kind of thrown into the fire. He was not expected to be the starter, but the starter who initially was Elias Larry, who's now has transferred to Colorado State, he did not perform well early, and Duhart replaced him in the lineup, and it was kind of on-the-job training. But I expected Duhart to be vastly improved going into this season, and then they had to find another safety. And as of right now, it looks coming out of spring camp, it looked like the other safety, which they call the Bandit, is going to be Mbidi Williams, and he's a converted corner. So they moved him to safety last season, and he ended up, taking over as the starter. But he also was adjusting to a new position. So I think they're very, very solid in the defensive backfield as far as starters, but the backups behind them are all inexperienced. In most cases, none of them have even played. So again, big issue for the secondary is developing depth.
Bill, if you had to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season here in 2024, who would that be?
I would say Landon Robinson, the nose guard. And that was probably Navy's biggest loss was Donald Berniard Jr. He was the starting nose guard basically since the middle of his freshman season and was simply outstanding. Undersized guy, but played with great leverage and explosion. And he was an unsung guy that just did his job and did it well for 4 years, often overlooked because he's not flashy and doesn't make a lot of plays. I mean, in a lot of cases, the nose guard's job is to take on double teams and hold the point of attack. So he might not be getting into the backfield and making tackles for loss or, making sacks on pass downs. But Berniard was outstanding, and in my opinion, was an all-conference level player, even though he didn't get the recognition he deserved. So this is a huge void. And Landon Robinson is a remarkable player. He was recruited as a linebacker, and they moved him to defensive line. So he, I think, has gone from 225 pounds when he was recruited to 290 pounds, but he has maintained his athleticism. He runs one of the fastest 40-yard dash times on the team. He consistently clocks 20 miles per hour plus on the GPS. He is just a freak athlete, and he holds all the weight room records. He's throwing up weight in the weight room like you wouldn't believe. They just had a video clip recently of him breaking the record in the squat. So he is a freak athlete. And to show you what a freak athlete is, he was one of only 2 nose guards in the entire country who played on the kickoff coverage unit last year. So a 290-pound nose guard running down the field on kickoff coverage. So I think Landon Robinson could be your breakout defensive player.
Sounds like he's got some fast feet. I got to know, what's that squat record?
I think it was something close to 400 pounds.
All right.
Now that spring practice is over, which position group or groups do you feel is the most concerning?
That's a very good question. Well, I would say wide receiver, just because they were using slot backs at wide receiver during spring camp because they graduated a bunch of wide receivers, and then all the returning receivers that had any sort of playing time were not available during spring camp. So that would be one major area of concern to me. You've got to have, playmakers at wide receiver. And this is all a situation that began toward the end of last season. They literally reached emergency status against Army, where they had no true wide receiver available in the game due to injuries, and they were using slot backs at wide receiver. And that was last year, a set where they have 2 wide receivers. Now, remember, again, in the wing T, most often there isn't going to be 2 true wide receivers. It's going to be 1 because you got a tight end on the field. And a lot of times, slot backs, or what used to be called slot backs, are going to become slot receivers now instead of in the more backfield type. So, but I would say wide receiver is a question mark. And to me, the offensive line is always a question mark until it shows it on the field. And frankly, last year, Navy's offensive line wasn't that great. You mentioned the rushing numbers. That might be good nationally in a college football world where everybody's throwing the ball, but those numbers weren't good for Navy. Navy's accustomed to rushing for 300 yards a game during the heyday of the triple option. They led the nation in rushing dozens of times during the period that Paul Johnson and Ken Niumatalolo were the head coach. They're accustomed to being up around 300 yards a game. So being in the 200-yard range is not acceptable. And that is one thing that Drew Cronick and the head coach Brian Newberry have said. Triple option, wing T, whatever you call it, whatever offense is being employed, Navy has to run the ball. And the reason they have to run the ball is they have to control the clock. They have to dominate possession, and they have to keep the other team off the field. That's Navy football, is using the offense to hog the ball and take time off the clock. So Navy's going to have to run no matter what offensive systems they're using, and they need to be more in the range of 240 to 250 yards per game rushing on the ground. So again, the offensive line has to prove it to me. Last year, they weren't good enough.
So what would you say the main strength for this football team is this year?
Defense. The defense has been good ever since Brian Newberry was named defensive coordinator. He brought in a very aggressive system. He's an attacking type defensive coordinator. And when he was promoted to head coach, he handed the reins off to his top lieutenant, PJ Volker. PJ was with Brian at Kennesaw State, came here to Navy with Brian. They are completely on the same page. They know exactly what they want to do defensively, and the defense has been good since 2019 when Brian Newberry arrived. They were good again last year. They return a significant number of players, and they have solid replacements for those players that graduated. So defense is the strength of the team.
How would you define success for Navy in 2024? When the season's over, you look back on it and you say, hey, this was a successful year.
Number one, it starts with winning the Commander-in-Chief's trophy. And Navy has not done that since 2019, but prior to that, they hadn't done it for a while. So just so you all know, 2019 was sort of an outlier. If you go and look at Navy right now, they're in the midst of 5 losing seasons in the span of 6. And the outlier was 2019, and that is the year that Malcolm Perry was the quarterback, and he literally ran wild. He ran for over 2,000 rushing yards. He was a freak. They had a really good offensive line, and he had a season for the ages, and a lot of it was unscripted. We all used to joke that Navy's best play with Malcolm Perry was he drops back to pass and then takes off running, and he had a bunch of breakaway runs in that type of scramble situation. So 2019 was the year that the offense was great because of a player who ended up going to the NFL who was a freak athlete and a special talent. But the offensive problems have been brewing since 2018, and even you could say to some extent 2017, and they haven't quite ever fixed. And that's part of the reason they're going to the wing T, is that there's various things, and we would go and have to have another show to talk about the change in blocking rules in the NCAA, but the inability to cut block on the perimeter completely changed the triple option, because everything Navy did was reliant on being able to cut block on the perimeter. And when they were no longer allowed to do that, it fundamentally changed everything about the triple option. So part of going to the wing T is to find another type of unique offense that people do not see on a regular basis that can make you different and give you an advantage. And it has a lot of the same elements of the triple option in that it's based on numbers and angles and deception, etc. So, but you've got to be able to run the ball effectively. So anyway, I kind of feel like I've gotten away from the original question. Repeat the original.
No, just how you define success.
You got to win the Commander-in-Chief's trophy. You got to beat Army and Air Force and win the Commander-in-Chief's trophy. And if you're not doing that, it's not a successful season. And then, of course, they want to be able to have a winning record and go to a bowl. But that is secondary to beating the other 2 service academies and capturing the Commander-in-Chief's trophy. Army has been the dominant service academy, but Navy hasn't been able to beat Army or Air Force. And frankly, that's a big reason why Ken Niumatalolo, despite all of his tremendous success and being the winningest coach in program history, the reason he lost his job is he wasn't beating Army and Air Force on a consistent basis. In fact, his record over his last 6 seasons was very, very poor against the 2 service academies. So that's where it all starts.
Well, hey, Bill, I know you're on a time constraint, so we want to thank you for sharing your time and knowledge with us today.
Well, I hope it worked out, guys. I enjoyed it, and I hope that I was able to bring the fans a little more insight into the Navy football program.
If you're watching on YouTube and have not already done so, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening in podcast form, please rate and leave a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you all for your support. And until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.